Alright, hey guys, welcome back. We're going to get into Chapter 5 of The Great Gatsby today, starting with a recap and then going into a closer reading of key sections. So we'll just dive right in. Chapter 5 begins with Nick returning home and seeing Gatsby just kind of sulking around, waiting. You know, the story has been laid bare, and Gatsby wants to know, is Nick going to help him? At the end of the day, intimidation, impression, whatever Gatsby did to Nick, all of his hopes and dreams kind of rest on whether Nick says yes. Nick knows that Tom is cheating on his cousin, so he's not inclined to, do right by Tom, and he understands that maybe Daisy deserves something better, right? So he ends up saying, yeah, you know what, Gatsby, I will help you. Daisy comes over for tea the next day, and Gatsby initially kind of runs away like a little boy, right? He's too scared to even talk to her. He ends up going out through the back door, getting completely drenched in rain, and having to sit there at tea, just completely his outfit's completely ruined. It's almost comical. Things are super awkward. Nick steps out for a minute, but when he comes back, the rain stops and everything in the house, the mood completely has changed, right? And Daisy and Gatsby are as if they're in love again. So at that point, Gatsby's like, hey, you know what? I live pretty close by. Do you want to go see my house? Turns out, he to Daisy's joy, it's just the gigantic mansion right next door. So he goes and shows her everything, watching very cautiously if she likes it or not, because again, he's created or crafted this entire image to please her, and so if she doesn't like it, he's going to be very quick to change it. We're going to see that throughout the course of the novel. But they make it over to Gatsby's house. Some really weird symbolic stuff happens with shirts and stuff like that. We'll talk about it later. But eventually Nick leaves, and that's Chapter 5. He leaves with the knowledge that the affair between Gatsby and Daisy is now starting in earnest. So
keep it always full of interesting, celebrated people. Come with me. House looks well, doesn't it? See the way the whole front catches the light like that? That's splendid.
Come on, you two. I want the royal tour.
You must understand that I like all things that are modern. Presses the arm, comes out there. Oh.
Will you still love me when I'm no longer young and beautiful?
Anyone for a round of golf?
You do know I'm a champion golfer, don't you?
Great, go on.
I thought so.
Mark will do the cameras and let us
Let me
design.
show you. I'll show you how it's done.
All right, Phil. He's gonna take a swing. Ready? Hey, forward!
I'm such a brute.
Okay, you ready for your close-up?
I don't want to forget a single
You're
moment.
shimmering.
She looks like she could be on the cover of Vogue, don't you
Turn
think?
on the camera. Oh, it's beautiful.
It's a custom Wurlitzer.
Can anyone play that?
Clip Springer cat. Someone wake you in. Of course, sir.
Music. And then we can dance all
Lynn's a
night.
symphonic genius. He can play anything.
Then I demand a
She
chance.
makes it look so splendid, don't you think, old
Still
spoon?
love me when I'm no longer.
really, let's take a look at some of the closer or more important pieces in Chapter 5. First is when Gatsby comes back into Nick's house and he's just completely in ruin, right? There is, if you'll recall, a clock on the mantelpiece, and Gatsby accidentally leans against it. You know, when you're nervous, you kind of find something to lean against or something to interact with, and the clock ends up toppling over. He nearly breaks it, and they have a really long conversation about the clock. We already know. We've studied clocks plenty of times in other novels and short stories already. It literally symbolizes time, right? And so if this literal symbol of time is collapsing over onto Gatsby, it's a pretty obvious symbol there, right? I mean, it's time literally catching up to Gatsby or rushing towards him or falling on him. He's having some sort of conflict with time, right? Of course, he's losing time with Daisy, or he's lost so much time with Daisy already over the last 5 years. And the question is, can that time be brought back? And the answer is really no, but if I'll read that scene to you, just keep those ideas in mind. "We've met before," muttered Gatsby. His eyes glanced momentarily at me and his lips parted with an abortive attempt at a laugh. Luckily, the clock took this moment to tilt dangerously at the pressure of his head, whereupon he turned and caught it with trembling fingers and set it back in place. Then he sat down rigidly, his elbow on the arm of the sofa and his chin in his hand. "I'm sorry about the clock," he said. My own face had now assumed a deep tropical burn. He's blushing. I couldn't muster up a single commonplace out of the 1,000 in my head. "It's an old clock," I told him idiotically. I think we all believed for a moment that it had smashed in pieces on the floor. That's brought to a head when we know how perceptive of time Gatsby is. Take a look at this very next line. Daisy says, "We haven't met for many years," said Daisy, her voice as matter-of-fact as it could be. 5 years next November. The automatic quality of Gatsby's answer set us all back at least another minute. So Gatsby is obsessed with time, and we know that. He's been counting the minutes and seconds since he last saw Daisy. Not really, but I mean, it's obvious how important time is to him, how much he feels like he's already lost. So another big symbol at work is the weather. It's raining when we first see Daisy and Gatsby meeting again. After Nick steps out for a moment and returns, we see that things have improved, and so has the weather. But you'll notice that the chapter ends on rain, which again is foreshadowing probably for an ominous ending between these two. As they make their way through the house, one character you should remember is Klipspringer. He's the only other person living in the house. Certainly, Gatsby invites plenty of people over all the time to enjoy his estate for the parties and everything, but only other one person actually lives there, and his name's Klipspringer, and he's what Nick calls the boarder, right? Meaning he boards there. He's leeching or mooching off of Gatsby almost, just kind of living under his roof, and he'll play music at his parties and stuff like that, but just remember Klipspringer's name. Okay, one of the more iconic scenes in maybe all of literature, right, is Daisy crying over Gatsby's shirts. As they finish up their tour of the house, Gatsby starts throwing his shirts onto the bed, kind of showing them off to Daisy, and it's described as this. "He took out a pile of shirts and began throwing them one by one before us, shirts of sheer linen and thick silk and fine flannel, which lost their folds as they fell and covered the table in many-colored disarray. While we admired, he brought more, and the soft, rich heap mounted higher, shirts with stripes and scrolls and plaids in coral and apple green and lavender and faint orange, with monograms of Indian blue. Suddenly, with a strained sound, Daisy bent her head into the shirts and began to cry stormily. 'They're such beautiful shirts,' she sobbed, her voice muffled in the thick folds. 'It makes me sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before.'"
I have a man in England who buys me clothes.
I've never seen anything like it.
Something for the lady. Sends over a selection at the beginning of each season.
Jay!
These are silk.
Jay!
These are flannel.
They're so beautiful.
Indian cotton.
Stop it. Jay!
Linen.
Mickey, he's a madman.
I can't help you. Flannel.
You're going to have to refold every single one of them. You'll ruin them. Jay, stop it.
Right here.
No, Jay.
What is it? Daisy, darling, what is it?
It makes me sad.
Why?
Because
5 lost years struggled on Daisy's lips.
To think that Daisy's crying about shirts, it's plausible because we understand Daisy is kind of somewhat materialistic. I mean, she's a rich girl, but that would be doing her and Gatsby a disservice here. I mean, what's happening, and Fitzgerald's pretty clear about it, is we're seeing the variety of life in regard to Gatsby, right? Certainly, he is not as stoic as Tom, right? He's lived a life full of unique experiences, and the shirts with all the different colors and patterns represent that. And so Daisy's looking over these shirts and she's realizing all the variety of life that she's missed out on because of her impatience or her failures in regard to the way she handled her time. As he learned in the last chapter, Daisy refused almost to wait for Gatsby. It took him too long to return from war, and so she let her life be shaped by Tom Buchanan. So this is her showing regret for not waiting for Gatsby, essentially, or for the life that she's missed out on because she didn't wait for Gatsby. Also, she could just be materialistic, but the last thing, and this is a little out of order, but I wanted to touch on it last, is Gatsby's reaction to Daisy. Do you think that he's happy with what's happening? A lot of people are like, yeah, of course, he's got the girl of his dreams, finally, right there in front of him. But consider this. Has there ever been anything in your life that you've waited a long time for, and when you reached that pinnacle or when you achieved that thing, it was a little underwhelming? Maybe you had been hoping or waiting for a movie to come out. Maybe you'd been waiting to have some first experience, or you were going to go somewhere on vacation, whatever it is, right? And as soon as you do that thing, you're like, this isn't as good as I hoped it would be, because the anticipation and the expectation that you built up in the time that you were waiting for it kind of outweighed the reality of what it could provide to you. One example might be like graduation, right? For you guys, you're going to graduate this coming year. And I remember sitting in that room, and when I, walked up and I got my diploma and I sat back down, I was like, that was it? That's weird. It wasn't as life-changing as I kind of had thought it would be. Think about that as we read this excerpt. As I went over to say goodbye, I saw that the expression of bewilderment had come back into Gatsby's face, as though a faint doubt had occurred to him as to the quality of his present happiness. Almost 5 years. There must have been moments even that afternoon when Daisy tumbled short of his dreams, not through her own fault, but because of the colossal vitality of his illusion. It had gone beyond her, beyond everything. He had thrown himself into it with a creative passion, adding to it all the time, decking it out with every bright feather that drifted his way. No amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart. That last line again, no amount of fire or freshness can challenge what a man will store up in his ghostly heart. When we build expectation, when we shape an idea of what something should be like in our heads, it's going to be very hard almost every time for reality to meet that expectation. So understand throughout the rest of the novel, Daisy's going to continue to fall short of Gatsby's expectations, and how is that going to affect his decision making going forward. All right, that's chapter 5. Go ahead and dive into chapter 6, and I will see you guys next week.